And I can imagine just because of the wind energy alone. So you're going to have a bumpy ride. We're probably going to have a delayed takeoff here with about 45-minute delays. And ultimately, that turns into departure delays here as we watch flights come in late. They end up leaving late. And we've got a ways to get through in terms of all this rain coming through the Atlanta area. That's the main spot to watch right now. But we'll keep an eye on our airports like Pensacola and Tallahassee into the afternoon. Jim.
Nice tailwind, though, from Atlanta to New York today.
That's true.
We could see more damage like what we saw across the south, unfortunately, with the trees coming down. Meteorologist Chris Bruin joins us live from Roswell, Georgia, with a look at that potential damage. Chris, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Jim. Yeah, we're trying to get in expert with trees before we get another round of very heavy rainfall. So we're in a little bit of a lull right now, no lightning. Kevin Caldwell out of the Atlanta Metro, first aid for trees and plants. I love this. So ingredients today, wind and saturated ground, not a good problem here for trees.
No, that combined with some loading on foliage or tree defects, particularly at the base of a tree, things like mushrooms or conchs or heaving ground will be the trees that are most vulnerable. Yep. So trees without leaves aren't as vulnerable typically unless they have some of those visible defects typically.
Now, we're in the south. We still have a lot of trees that still have their leaves, foliage year-round. Is there certain species that are more prone to fall?
Well, right now it's your conifers, the pine trees that have the foliage on them, and pine trees in themselves aren't necessarily more dangerous, but when you do have the loading with the water on the needles and heavy wind, and particularly wind that comes out of a different typical wind loading direction, and when it's not coming out of the west, you're going to have potentially some more problems with some of those trees.
Let's briefly talk about that. We were talking just before. Typically we get our west and northwesterly wind, southwesterly, but when you get an odd wind, like a rotating wind in a strong thunderstorm or an east wind, how does that stress the tree?
Well, in Atlanta, because our winds are predominantly somewhat out of the west, when they come out of the east, tree roots have grown better to support the wind loading on the predominant wind sides of the trees. So trees that are getting loaded on the other side that may have a defect on the east sides of the tree, whether it's east, southeast, northeast, if they have a defect such as a fungal conch or roots that are rotting and you get that wind loading, those trees aren't getting loaded like that as much, so you don't really see them fail as frequently, but when there's a failure, it's usually pretty catastrophic because those trees don't have as strong a root systems on that side.
All right, Kevin Caldwell, we appreciate your expertise. First aid for trees and plants. A busy man probably in the next week or so. So be mindful, know what to look for before situations like these, Jim, come through. It's a little late for this one, but for future terms, especially if you notice excess decay at the base, that's a problem.
All right, let's talk about that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And sometimes you can't see that decay because it's kind of behind the the bark. Let's talk about what we got going on severe weather-wise. I want to get to this warning around Lawrenceville, Georgia. This is a major suburb of Atlanta. You can see the storm right up and through here. This one's got some rotation with it. Looks like the rotation's increasing a little bit. That rotation's now up over